For 12 years in a row, her mother walked her to the bus, watched the doors close, and went back home. Every single morning, without exception. And every morning she was certain she knew where her daughter was going. She was wrong. Carlos Humberto had been working that route for years, reliable, punctual, he knew names, greeted parents, smiled, exactly the kind of person you trust so completely that you stop thinking about it. The family had known him for a long time, and according to investigators, he knew that too. And so, in early 2012, on one ordinary morning in Medellin, the route didn't end at the school. According to Colombia's Fiscalía, the national prosecutor's office handling the case, Grisales took her to an apartment in the city center, in the Prado Centro neighborhood. Just around the corner from the streets, she knew. She walked in on her own. No struggle, no screaming, no signs of force, and she remained in the same city. All 12 years. That's the central question of this story. Where did she spend those years, and how was she eventually found? How exactly did Grisales construct things so that she followed him of her own free will, at an age when she was still learning to read and count? On her own, that same evening, someone called the school. The answer was brief. She hadn't been there. Not in the morning, not during the day, not for a single class. Only one thing was clear: she never arrived. One route, one driver, and between picked up at the stop and never reached school, not a single explanation held together. Carlos didn't answer his phone right away. That same evening, the family filed a missing persons report, and according to the Fiscalía, the search began immediately. Relatives searched, authorities searched, but there were no results, because while the family was still going over details at the precinct and calling everyone they knew, Grisales was already moving. The first apartment in the Prado Centro neighborhood of Medellin wasn't used for long. According to Noticias Caracol, he moved her to Bello, a neighboring municipality just north of the city. A new neighborhood. A different address. No overlap with any route the family knew. The entire logic of this maneuver was about distance, not physical distance, just a few kilometers, but the kind that matters. The search was happening in one place, and she was somewhere else. Those few blocks stretched into 12 years. By every indication, this should have been a kidnapping. A busy morning, a route through residential streets, dozens of people all around, and not a single witness who had seen anything. Police swept the area around the school, questioned neighbors, checked stops, courtyards, entryways. Nothing. A disappearance without a trace is a particular kind of dead end. Investigators know where to start when there's evidence. When there isn't, there's simply nowhere to begin. The standard theories were on the table. First, she was taken by force, quickly and without a scene, but a busy morning route and a complete absence of witnesses didn't add up. Second, she left on her own, but no line of inquiry produced a lead strong enough to pursue. The investigation hit a wall it couldn't break through for 12 years, because what happened that morning was not a kidnapping in the conventional sense, which meant only one thing. Someone had spent time, long before that day, making sure she walked in exactly that way, on her own. And while investigators cycled through their theories, Grisales stayed exactly where he had been from the beginning, above suspicion. They didn't stop the next day. They didn't stop a year later. The family kept going in circles, doing everything that could be done without authority or resources. According to the Fiscalía, the search never stopped. And that's not a figure of speech. Over time, people around them started speaking more quietly. So much time has passed. Medellin isn't the safest city. People disappear. Most likely, she's already gone. The family refused to accept that. Officially, she was still listed as a missing person, not a confirmed case. And behind that distinction wasn't legal hair-splitting, but the only way to keep going. As long as there's no confirmation, the case stays open. The search continues, and the family stayed suspended in something that looked like neither grief nor ordinary life. Something in between, for 12 years. Meanwhile, she was in the same city, probably a few kilometers from the stop where they'd put her on the bus every morning. He moved her between neighborhoods in Medellin and Bello. Each move made her slightly harder for anyone searching to reach. A new address, a different neighborhood, a new name. The family was looking for one person, someone who, by that point, no longer existed in any document or under any name, and that was the entire calculation. Not to hide her thousands of kilometers away, but to turn her into someone else, right next door. Humberto was 63 at the time of his arrest, which means in early 2012, he was around 51. A middle-aged man, a school bus driver in the heart of Medellin. Prado Centro, dense housing, heavy traffic, families everywhere. A route where a stranger stands out immediately, and where a familiar face gradually becomes part of the morning landscape. Grisales was exactly that. Part of the landscape. According to the Fiscalia, the profession gave him direct, daily, and entirely legitimate access to families and the children he transported. No complaints, no incidents, with parents, attentive, warm, considerate, with the children riding behind him, patient. Exactly the combination needed to stop being perceived as a threat and start being taken for granted. No exact figures exist in public materials about how long he worked that route before 2012, but investigators established the key point. He used his position deliberately to build trust, with the families and with the children he drove every day. This wasn't an incidental choice. It was systematic work, built on access, constructed methodically and without haste. That kind of reputation isn't built in a week. And that reputation became his primary tool. Every morning, the same thing happened. A parent walked out to the bus and physically handed their child to this man, not to a neighbor, not to a relative, to a driver, someone no one had specifically vetted because the system had done it for them. The school hired him, so he must be fine. This wasn't a one-time contact. It was a daily, repeating ritual, so normalized it had become invisible. After a month, you stop thinking about who you're waving to, you just wave. Grisales understood this. According to Noticias Caracol, he worked his way from acquaintance to reliable presence to someone you don't need to explain things to, because he already knew the schedule, the route, the habits. He was woven into the daily routine so tightly that his presence stopped requiring attention. That was the first level. But there was a second layer of work, running parallel, invisible to the family. According to Caracol, by the time she disappeared, she perceived him not as a stranger or simply a familiar driver, but as a paternal figure, someone close, someone safe to be around, and that's the core of the whole structure. That kind of perception doesn't appear by accident. It doesn't form in a single ride. Someone spent time, patience, and daily contact building it to be exactly that. Long before that morning, parental trust is a protective perimeter, but Grisales wasn't only working from the outside. According to investigators and NTC sources, he was simultaneously building a separate relationship directly with her. Gradual, patient, built through everyday small gestures that an adult wouldn't notice, but that carry real weight for someone still learning how the world works. For a child who is still learning to read, a paternal figure is a specific architecture of reality. The one who is there every morning, the one who knows your name, your schedule, what you like, the one who doesn't cause harm, and therefore is safe. An authority you follow without asking questions. You don't run from that person. You follow them. That's the difference between what happened that morning and a conventional abduction. No force, no threats, just accumulated, deliberately constructed perception in which he already occupied a place close to safety, not close to danger. The specific mechanics, what words, gestures, recurring rituals shaped that perception, are not detailed in public materials. According to the prosecution's account, he persuaded her to come to the apartment in the center of Medellin. Materials from the Fiscalia and Cambio Colombia document it exactly this way. Persuaded, not grabbed, not forced. Persuaded. And she came. What exactly he said that day is not preserved in the public record. Whatever it was, it worked through what had been built long before. When someone occupies the role of a paternal figure, they don't need special words. Ordinary ones are enough, The kind that someone still learning how the world works hears from close people every day. "Come on, I'll show you something. It's not far. Just for a moment." She wasn't walking into a trap. She was walking towards someone she trusted. It was a managed entry, prepared long before that morning, and here, one part of this story ends, and a second begins. Completely different, because walking in willingly and not leaving for 12 years are two different mechanisms. The first was built over months through trust. The second began the moment the door closed behind her. The center of Medellin. Dense housing, noise, streets, people everywhere. And somewhere inside all of it, an apartment where what the Fiscalia would later characterize as systematic psychological conditioning began. He started explaining to her how the world worked. No threats. No locks. At this stage, there appeared to have been no physical restraints. He explained. What was happening was presented as normal, just how life is. For someone who already perceived him as a paternal figure, this functioned as an explanation, not as coercion. A child who is still learning doesn't have their own frame of reference to check what they're hearing against. There is only the authority of the adult nearby, and that adult was saying, everything is fine. Did she think about home in those first days? About her mother? The case file doesn't record it. When exactly something shifted inside her, also unknown. But the process began here, in that first apartment. Outside, the city continued as normal. A few blocks away, the family was putting up flyers and calling neighbors. And inside, without visible coercion, a reality was being rewritten. Not through fear, through repetition, through authority, through the daily insistence that this is how things are supposed to be. This was only the first apartment, one of the first documented steps, but one detail confirmed by virtually every source covering Grisal's arrest stands out as particularly significant. The name change. For an adult, a name is a label, something that can be changed without losing much. For someone who has lived 8 years, it's structured differently. It was spoken by her mother. It was the thing she had always answered to for as long as she could remember. To take away a name is to take away the point from which a person recognizes themselves, the one from which everything else begins. The practical purpose was clear. The person being searched for now carried a different name. Documents, registries, alerts, all of it was issued for someone who formally didn't exist here anymore. The new name made her invisible to any system built to find the old one. But there was a second function, an internal one. A new name, spoken only by the one adult present, gradually became simply her name, with no alternative, no other voice, no mirror in which anything of the former self remained. How quickly she stopped responding to her old name is not recorded in the case file, but this was not just a practical maneuver. It was the first line of overwriting, and the name was only the beginning. The prosecution documents this in 2 words: removed from school, cut off from all contact. But school isn't only classes. It's the only place where a child regularly exists among people not chosen for them by the adult in control. People who know the real name. People who might ask, "Where were you yesterday? Who is that man? Why didn't you come?" And all of that was gone, immediately. No peers, no accidental witnesses, no point of comparison through which anything could be checked or measured. The only available reality was the one he was constructing. There were no other sources. Taken together, isolation and the new name created a vacuum, inside which his words about everything being normal met no resistance, because there was no one to push back. Whether there were occasional moments of contact with the outside world during those years is not detailed in public case materials, but the logic of the moves between apartments addressed this structurally, on its own. Each time, new neighbors, no history, no context, no questions. Medellin and Bello are 2 neighboring areas merged into a single urban agglomeration. There's no difference in density or rhythm between them. The logic of moving was structural. Every new address meant a complete reset. New neighbors had no point of comparison. They couldn't notice any change because they had no before. Questions get asked by people who have been watching long enough. Grisales never let anyone watch that long. How exactly he secured these properties, whether he rented under a false name, used intermediaries, made informal arrangements, the investigation is still examining. It's not addressed in public materials, but neighbors existed, and they observed something, a man alongside someone very young, then a teenager, then a young woman, and no one contacted the police. Why? There's no public answer to that question. Most likely the scene looked ordinary. A grandfather with a granddaughter, a father with a daughter, something familiar enough to not require a second glance. No one knew the context. The system operated not through active concealment, but through normalcy. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't trying to catch a stranger's eye or send any kind of signal. And it wasn't only fear of consequences, though that, by all indications, was present too. The system, by that point, was also working from the inside. But inside that constructed norm, something began to change. She was growing up. And growing up is a process that can't be controlled from the outside, no matter how many layers of isolation have been built around it. Among the formal charges brought against Grisales, video documentation of what took place is a documented fact, classified under aggravated offenses. Not a theory, not a defense position, a separate count of indictment. Why? The official prosecution position doesn't offer a direct answer, but the place of this tool within the larger structure is clear from everything built around it. A recording in a system like this isn't just a separate crime. It's a material object that exists independently of her words, her memory, or her version of events, something that can't be contested and can't be taken back. Whether she knew about the recordings is also unknown. What he said about them, if anything, is unknown. But the simple fact of their existence fit the same logic as everything else. You're already part of this. Any attempt to go outside means not freedom, but a collision with something that's been documented and will not disappear. The confinement in this case wasn't built from walls or locks. It was built from layers. Trust was the first. A new name, isolation, the normalization of what was happening, documentation, each one. And each successive layer made the structure denser and the exit harder to imagine. But structures built on psychological pressure have one vulnerable point. They're designed for someone who is still learning how the world works, not for someone who is growing up inside them. She was 13, then 16. She was growing, but not the way people grow when they have access to the world. She grew inside one structure, constructed by one person, without school memories, because there were none. Without that before period which, for most people, serves as a starting point, the place from which you understand who you were and who you became. For her, it was simply life. Not imprisonment, not an anomaly, just the way things are, the only familiar arrangement. That's how years-long psychological conditioning, begun at an age when you're still learning to read, operates. It doesn't leave the feeling of a cage, because the person inside has never seen anything else. That's why 12 years in the same city were possible without constant physical locks. Not because leaving was physically difficult, but because there was no frame of reference that would say, what is happening is not normal. There is an alternative. There are people looking for you. That frame of reference didn't exist because it had been removed at the beginning. Through the name, the isolation, the normalization, the documentation, layer by layer in sequence without haste, until the construction became the only known reality. When the first cracks began to appear is also not recorded in the case file, but the prosecution documents a specific turning point, the moment after which the story moved into a different phase. She turned 16. For 9 years, there had been no lock, not because he couldn't put one there, but because it wasn't needed. The structure held on its own, from the inside, without physical force. And then, at some point, something shifted inside that structure. The prosecution records this without elaboration, but the fact itself is entirely concrete. She confronted Grisales. She raised objections about how he had been treating her. What gave her that point of reference, the case file doesn't specify. Whether it was accidental contact with the outside world, something she heard or saw, unknown. But the outcome is documented. She found the words. She named what was happening as wrong, for the first time in 9 years. That's not simply the act of a teenager. It speaks to the nature of the system itself. It had begun breaking down from the inside before any physical lock appeared on the outside. And it was precisely then, when the psychological structure cracked, that Grisales resorted for the first time to something he had gone 9 years without needing. His response to her words was a door, locked from the outside. The door closed for the first time in 9 years, exactly in that sequence, not earlier, not in the first days, or the first years, only when the words that had worked without a lock for 9 years stopped holding. That chronological detail is one of the most precise observations in the entire case. How long she spent behind that locked door isn't established in public materials. According to investigators, she was around 19 when she got out. That means physical confinement lasted approximately 3 years. After 9 years without a lock, 3 years behind a closed door, and in the end, she found a way out. Not the investigation, which had spent 12 years searching without finding her. She left on her own and spoke. February 2024. She was around 19. How exactly she got out of the apartment where he had locked her is not detailed in available materials. The prosecution records only the outcome. She escaped. She went to the police, and her statement was what launched the criminal investigation. Not a tip, not a lucky find, not detective work. Her words, the entry point for everything that followed. What exactly she told police first, how she described 12 years, is not disclosed in public materials. How the reunion with her family, who had never stopped looking, went, also not disclosed. The prosecution is protecting her identity. In sources, she appears only under the assumed name Juliana. 9 months passed between her escape and Grisales' arrest. He was detained by the Medellin police. 3 days later, in a hearing, the prosecution formally charged him. He denied everything, without exception. Not a single charge was accepted. The judge of the 14th Municipal Criminal Court of Medellin did not accept his version. He was ordered held in custody pending a full trial. Grounds: danger to society and flight risk. And when the case became public, another woman came forward. While the hearings were underway, another woman appeared at the prosecutor's office. 21 years old. According to Carlos Arcila Valencia, Secretary for Peace and Human Rights, she stated that Grisales had done the same to her when she was a minor. She had managed to get away sooner by taking advantage of his absence from the apartment. Her statement has been included in the criminal proceedings. 2 survivors. 2. Both came forward after the case became public. One escaped on her own. The other came forward after she heard about the arrest. How many there actually are, investigators have no number. That question remains publicly open. 63 years old, a school bus driver. No complaints on record, no incidents, no criminal history, because no one had gotten out and spoken until February 2024. Now it's possible to answer the question that has stood since the beginning of this story. How did a school bus driver make her stay for 12 years without ever needing force or threats? He built it in advance, methodically, layer by layer, through the job, through the family, through her, and through everything that came after the door closed. Each layer made the structure denser. In criminology, it has a name: grooming. It works not because parents are inattentive, it works because it is built on the most natural reflex, trust extended to someone you see every day, someone you know by face. That trust was the first brick. What are your thoughts on this story? Leave them in the comments, like the video, subscribe to our channel. See you next time.